The New Media Landscape is the title of Chapter 7, and for that term to make sense, I think we probably need to begin by taking a moment to unpack what that term new media is all about. Let's do a quick review of history. When we began our semester together, we looked at the development of the Gutenberg printing press and pegged that as the beginning of a new form of communication, mass communication, to differentiate it from centuries of interpersonal speech communication. And so for the better part of 500 years or so, the better part of 5 centuries, mass communication was defined as print, newspaper, book, magazine technology. Beginning about 100 years ago, radio and motion picture technologies began to develop. Later, pictures were added to radio and television comes along. And then in the 1960s, a pretty interesting decade of the 20th century, probably I would say due to the space race that was going on in the United States at that time, the advancements in computer technology really ramped up and sort of set the stage for where we are in the world of digital technology and digital media today. So, all of that is to say that when we talk about new media, we're talking really about what we call converged media, where the world of the internet, this new form of communication, is converging with one of the or more of the 7 traditional forms of mass media: books, newspapers, magazines, movies, recorded music, radio, television. New media takes advantage of the power of the internet. So, like I say, I think this is probably going to be one of the most interesting chapters that we'll undertake this semester. Interesting in the sense that there are so many different avenues, so many different areas to explore, and we have time in this course really only to get to the tip of the iceberg, if you are familiar with that old saying. We'll touch down on some of the really key aspects of developments in mass media in the last, roughly 25 years or so, going back to the introduction of the World Wide Web in the early 1990s. Let's begin by talking about search engines because for most of us, the World Wide Web probably wouldn't be as interesting to us and certainly not as useful to us if we didn't have some way of indexing or organizing the information that the web can present to us. And I'm old enough to remember back in the very earliest days of the World Wide Web when there, maybe 15 or 20 different companies were offering their versions of what was called a search engine. And they were kludgy, clunky, cluttered kinds of affairs, not necessarily all that easy to use. And the information that they brought to us, it varied in terms of its importance and its relevance. But the real revolution doesn't take too many years to come about. It happens in the mid to late 1990s. Yahoo was the first search engine that really made a splash across the United States and really taught people the power of search to serve as a sort of a front door portal, if you will, to the World Wide Web. And on the home screen, all kinds of information about news and sports and weather and financial information. Very cluttered screen, but, it did provide a lot of information. Then in the late 1990s, 2 graduate students, I believe that they were at MIT, Massachusetts. Well, I'm not sure about that, so maybe I'll retract that. I seem to think they were students at MIT, but I'm not entirely certain about that, so I'll check on that and clarify later in the lecture. Sergey Brin and Larry Page were graduate students. Now, where they were studying, My memory is a little foggy on that. But what is important is the search engine that they created. And they gave it the title Google, and we will be watching a video about the development of Google and where Google is in the search universe today. And they're going to explain how they settled on that name, Google. It does have meaning. They did change the spelling of that word a little bit, but it will be explained to you in the video that we're going to watch. It's called Inside the Mind of Google. It was produced in late 2009. So we have the advantage as we watch this video of seeing a report of where Google was in terms of its development as we get ready to enter 2010. And now we have the benefit of hindsight in looking back at some of the projections, some of the forecasts that were made during this documentary. And I'll point out to you some of the changes of where things have gone since this documentary was produced. Pages 177 and 178 of the textbook speak specifically to Google. Let's take a look at the mission of this company. Here's a statement about what Sergey Brin and Larry Page thought that this search engine could do for people in terms of navigating the World Wide Web. And it's a pretty simple, pretty straightforward, pretty direct statement of mission: to organize the world's information and to make it universally accessible and useful. I don't think any one of us would probably doubt that Google has long since achieved that goal. And I also want to call your attention to the motto of Google. We'll look at the official form, which is "You can make money without doing evil," and then the form of the motto that was truncated or shortened to the three-word phrase, "Don't do evil." Now, how important is that motto? How much is that motto upheld by the people who work day to day in the Google organization? So I think one of the most eye-opening pieces of information that will be presented to you in the video is when we learn that every search query that has ever been typed into that little rectangular Google search box on its home page, that the Google organization has retained the search query, the search string. Now stop and think about for a moment all of the different things that you searched for on Google. Would you be concerned about the fact that Google has retained all of the information that you have typed into that search box? Well, if this is starting to bug you a little bit, let me make note of the fact that Google officials will be the first to tell you that they don't know who you are when you type whatever it is that you type into the Google search box. The only correlation that they make between what is typed in and where it originates is the Google program does make a record of the Internet protocol, the IP address of the computer where the search originates. So it is possible, because every computer connected to the Internet has its own individual and totally unique IP address. You know, if it's a computer that you're using from a home Internet service, it might not be able, the search string, Google might not be able to trace it back specifically to you, unless you were the only person using the computer on that address. But it could identify the home at which that computer is installed. And Google will also tell you, I think it's after maybe a year and a half, they delete the IP address information, but they do keep what is typed into the search box. So if you feel that is in some way invading your privacy, maybe you might want to think twice the next time that you enter something that you might consider questionable into the Google search box. It's an interesting company. They're doing a lot. It's one of the, if not the most powerful companies in the world, and it certainly is worthy of study. this chapter. Here's another piece of information that you may or may not be aware of, and it certainly helps to extend the Google brand and to solidify the importance of the Google organization. Were you aware that Google owns YouTube? I don't remember the exact year. Let's say, for sake of the discussion, it was 6 or 7 years ago, and that particular year is not important. What is important is the fact that Google not only leads the world in terms of search, but also leads the world in terms of video hosting. And there's going to be a statistic mentioned in the video that tells you how many hours of new videos are uploaded to YouTube every minute. It's a staggering amount of video. So here we have one organization that very much, I won't say is in control or in charge of, but very dominant in the fields of internet search and internet video. Two people will be featured in the video. The person who is the chief executive officer of the corporation, and he'll be introduced in the video. I'd like to introduce to you now the young lady who I think she was like the 21st or 22nd person who was ever hired by the Google organization. Her name is Marissa Mayer, and she will be interviewed during and will be seen during much of the video. She is rather young, probably in her early 30s at the time that this documentary was filmed. And because she began with the Google company so early in its career and contributed so much to its success, she became just immensely wealthy as a result of it. She became a billionaire. That's with a B, billionaire, in her early 30s. She did at some point decide, after this documentary was produced, however, that maybe she had achieved her goals at Google, and in looking for a new challenge, she was hired as the chief executive officer at competitor Yahoo, whose fates and fortunes were certainly in decline since the rise to power of Google. And so she comes to work to head this company, and long story short, over a period of about 6 years or so, in a saga that ended in early 2017, Yahoo was purchased, and Ms. Meyer left the company. She did so with several millions of dollars adding to her wealth, but the bottom line is that she, despite all of her efforts, was not able to instill the kind of success with Yahoo that she had with Google. She hired former CBS TV news anchor Katie Couric, for example, as a chief information officer for Yahoo. Well, the public didn't seem to be too interested in following Ms. Couric on the Yahoo website. She made a controversial move in 2013 in which she banned a number of Yahoo workers from the ability to work from home, which certainly is a growing aspect of the American workforce, and particularly in a digital high technology area where so much work can be done remotely from persons' homes. This did not sit well with the persons who were working for Yahoo, and her star power diminished as a result of that, and probably that was the real beginning of her downfall at the company. More on that when we get together in class to watch the video. Now, let's talk about the internet as a form of mass media, and let's compare and contrast it with the 7 traditional forms of mass media. And let's do the contrast here. The main difference between the internet and the other forms of the mass media, when we are active on the internet, we're able not only to receive messages, but we're also able to send them. And that is not a characteristic of a newspaper, for instance, We can't change the content of the newspaper. We could provide feedback in the form of a letter to the editor. We can't broadcast over the radio airwaves or the television airwaves, for that matter. We can offer feedback by turning off a program, and that does, in its own way, send a message. But I'm talking about the kind of media content that the internet makes possible. You take, for example, a blog or a tweet, and these kinds of user-generated media content are unique to the internet, not possible in the old-style, old-school, traditional forms of the mass media. Now, because of that unique nature of the internet, let's talk about this also. What do you understand about when it comes to some of the traditional forms of the mass media? I'm certain that you're aware of ratings that are associated with movies, with TV shows, with recorded music, and with video games. Where do these ratings originate? Who, for example, if you go to the movies and you sit through 4 or 5 of the trailers, the coming attractions prior to the start of the movie that you've gone to watch, and if you pay attention, probably you'll notice that there's a green screen that appears before each trailer, and it says this preview has been rated, and let's say R or PG-13, or given some lettered rating by the MPAA. So let's clarify something about ratings that are associated with various forms of the mass media. There is, in many instances, a mistaken presumption that ratings for mass media content are issued by the United States government. And let me please disabuse you of that notion. Please do not at the end of the semester leave this class thinking that our government is involved in the ratings of movies and TV shows, and video games and recorded music. No, that is not the case, and in fact, if it were, that would constitute censorship, in a form of censorship, which is prohibited by our Constitution. So, beginning back in 1968, the movies were the first of the traditional forms of mass media to have ratings associated with the content. Now, where do the ratings come from? I used movies a while ago as an example and cited the MPAA. That stands for the Motion Picture Association of America. All of the major studios that make the movies that we go to see belong to an industry organization called the MPAA. And so the way that we express this, the way that we talk about movie ratings or ratings for other forms of media content, we say that the industry is self-regulated. The movie ratings are imposed by representatives of the studios that make the movies. Same thing is true for video games, TV shows, and recorded music. But let's understand that content that we access over the web is not subject to industry self-regulation for at least a couple of really important reasons. One is because the ownership of the internet is not ascribed to any one corporation or to any one individual, and as such, there is no internet industry in and of itself to assign ratings. But I think maybe even more important than that, and this is an observation that we have mentioned in the lecture before, and that's the fact that the internet, much of internet activity, occurs outside the boundaries of the United States of America. And so who are we as citizens of the United States to say that we have the authority, we have the right, we have the power to impose ratings on content that comes from countries other than our own? So, like I said in a previous lecture, think of the internet in some ways as the old 1870s wild, wild west. Plenty of uncharted territory there, and it's a sort of an enter at your own risk kind of situation. You never can tell what kind of website might be hiding behind that suspicious-looking URL. One type of content that might be hiding there could be internet pornography. Chapter 7 takes you into a brief discussion about drawing a distinction between what is considered to be obscene material and what is considered to be pornographic material. And you can read some specific definitions of what constitutes obscenity and what constitutes pornography. But let's keep it simple for terms of discussion in this class. My suspicion, my guess would be that of all the things that you might have ever seen on the internet, or in the movies or on TV, wherever, you probably have never seen media content that would meet the legal challenge for obscenity. I think that many times we tend to use that word obscenity in a non-legal sense, in sort of a general everyday way of explaining content that might be offensive to some people. Well, there is no doubt that with its legal definition, obscene content is offensive. But the fact is, to meet the legal test in a court of law for content to be judged obscene, that's a very difficult challenge. And for that reason, very little content over the years has been judged to be legally obscene. We certainly might say that, this website or this movie had some obscenity in it. Really what we might be talking about is pornography, or maybe the wording that was used. Maybe it was offensive, but the fact is, it probably wasn't obscene. Again, that's because meeting the court test for determining what content is obscene and what isn't, that's a very high bar to be passed. And so you probably have never seen legal obscenity, material that is legally obscene. It cannot be banned by the government. Pornography cannot be banned by the government, but obscenity can. So in the future, I would encourage you maybe to be careful. Don't interchange the concepts of obscenity and pornography. Certainly, they have some relationship, and what is pornographic could be obscene, but not necessarily. Pornography in and of itself is legal under certain federal terms and, in some instances, under state and local government rulings. It can be legal, but obscenity is never legal. Are you familiar with the phrase net neutrality? An interesting concept that I'll present more information to you during class. Net neutrality has to do with the idea of internet data traffic, those digital zeros and ones of internet and digital communication, and how quickly those digital bits of information can move across the internet. And I suspect, and I don't want to get too technical with the discussion, but what we're talking about here is the concept of bandwidth. You might have heard people talk about how big is the pipe through which your internet connection is made. And I think that's a pretty good analogy. Certainly, the greater the amount of bandwidth, or the larger the pipe through which the digital streams of data can move around, the faster they can move around, the higher the quality of the content in terms of its technical performance. In other words, have you ever been watching Netflix and all of a sudden the screen froze up or locked up, or maybe the image started to pixelate? Well, that's probably because somewhere along the way between the Netflix server and your device, there was an internet traffic jam. Now, net neutrality is a concept that says that it doesn't matter who is the originator of the source information, that all internet traffic that's overseen by internet service providers, such as Verizon, such as Charter, some of the other major companies, AT&T, that all internet traffic be given the open road and allowed to travel freely without impediment. Now, there are some persons who would say that the greater the ability of a company to pay for the right to move its internet traffic at a higher rate should be allowed. In other words, Netflix should be allowed to pay an internet service provider more money than a nonprofit organization to ensure that their movie data streams run uninterrupted. And there's certainly a lot of debate out there about whether or not the idea of net neutrality, where everything in terms of content, every stream, every packet of data should be able to move at the same rate. This is an ongoing discussion, and I suspect that maybe even the next few years in the future, we're going to be hearing even more and more about the issue of net neutrality. So, in terms of our discussion for this part of the lecture on Chapter 7, we'll draw this to a close. As I mentioned several occasions, there will be multiple issues that we will be talking about in class, and we will be watching a portion of that video about inside the mind of Google. So I appreciate your attention for Chapter 7. Stay tuned. We'll see more about this when we get together in class.